Morning. Today is Tuesday, May 19th. I apologize for the delay in posting this. I just made a mistake. We're coming to the end of the year, and I know what that's like. I'm even having to reconfigure my schedule again. So, a few things. Tomorrow, Wednesday, May 20th, quiz number 23 is due. You know the practice at this point, minimum of 100 words. It can be emailed, it can be submitted in the packet. Open notes, open book, open video, open any resource. No working together, no plagiarism. The question is, how did the Cold War end? There's a lot of flexibility there, so you can take that in any direction you wish. Make sure by now most of you received at least a packet explaining, I circled things that I counted off or noticed. I do need proper grammar. I need correct spelling and correct punctuation. Also, make sensible statements. So every now and then I circle something because you might write something and it's just not true. So at least understand what you're talking about. I'll put it that way. Okay, let's continue with what we're calling the present, the post-Cold War, the world that we live in. So in 2007, 2008, we talked about the economic downturn that occurred under the very end of President George W. Bush's presidency. Now we get to 2008 when President Barack Obama became the first Black American president, which represented a significant milestone within our national history. Now, President Obama furthered the regulations introduced by President Bush. There was an irony. There were a lot of people, specifically Republicans, who criticized President Obama for the massive government increase under his administration, which is true, but they didn't say much during the massive government overreach during the Bush administration. So there was a degree of hypocrisy there. But it is true that under President Obama, the United States government expanded massively, regulation increased. Under his presidency, large portions of the healthcare system were placed under a portion of government control. It was called the Affordable Health Care Act. More frequently, it was called Obamacare. And that has turned out to be a very mixed result. Certainly has provided health care for some who couldn't have had it, but it has come so at a pretty massive cost. And the truth is, most of the costs have been deferred to later generations. So the actual truth is, you who are finishing up your sophomore year will be paying trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars for the health care of people right now who are ages 50 and 60 who made very little preparation in their life for this moment. So they've simply passed the buck on to you, and one generation steals from the next. And that's been going on since the advent of really Social Security and the New Deal. So this has created an unstable market that has yet to be resolved. Every year, the healthcare market continues to behave sporadically because there is no consistency. Almost any market will eventually settle into a stable environment so long as the rules are the same, but the rules change every year. This is President Barack Obama. He was just recently, he served two terms, two administrations, one administration, 2 terms. He just recently left office several years ago in favor of President Trump. President Obama was not able to seek a 3rd term by constitutional law. In Great Britain, so let's turn our attention to Great Britain. Tony Blair became prime minister back in 1997. His New Labour Party brought about a change in British politics. The Labour Party had been really depressed for quite some time within Great Britain, and Blair modernized their ideas. He really removed full socialism as one of their dreams and really made it a party of the masses. His work toward traditional labor goals, but not toward full socialism, made it palatable to a lot more people of Great Britain. He was a relatively popular prime minister. He helped negotiate the Good Friday Agreement, which helped to limit the struggle in Northern Ireland between the Protestants and the Catholics. There had been a lot of bloodshed and a lot of violence during the time of Troubles and beyond. He forged a good working relationship with President Bush. Eventually, England, or the Great Britain's part in the War of Iraq, hurt his popularity at home as casualties mounted. So in 2007, he resigned, and he was one of probably the 2 most significant prime ministers post-World War II in Great Britain. He certainly changed his nation, and in some ways for the better. Since Blair's resignation, Great Britain has had several short-term prime ministers. Like Europe, Britain struggles to adjust to a new world. It's struggling to cope with mass migration from Africa and the Middle East. Because Great Britain hitched itself to the European Union, This meant it was bound by laws and regulations from the European Union. Britain willingly gave up its sovereignty and its freedom, and that came with a pretty significant cost. And so the European Union, which has, I think, foolishly welcomed in so many migrants who are un, unwilling to socialize, unwilling to change, that has had massive ramifications in Europe, and it's had some ramifications in England as well. So, unlike Europe, though, Britain is actually struggling with the EU. In fact, Britain has voted to leave the EU and is in process of doing that. So there may be some hope for Britain establishing itself as, well, as its own nation, something unique and something independent. Germany has struggled through unification after the Cold War. We talked about the difficulty of East Germany and West Germany becoming one single Germany. East Germany was decades behind in political and economic development. That led to a massive transfusion of capital from the West into the East, but it has produced quite a bit of bitterness. And a lot of that has been overcome, by the way. In 2005, Angela Merkel became the Chancellor of Germany on the promise of reducing unemployment. She was in some ways uniquely suited for the task. She had been born in West Germany but had entered politics in East Germany. So she is really East German in many ways. She has certainly shaped Germany. Under Merkel's administration, Europe has grown closer to becoming a single power, though that has now been thrown into chaos because of all the difficulties presented by a number of things in the last 3 or 4 years in the European Union. She herself has largely been a force for stability in Germany and Europe. Now, I don't necessarily mean good, but I do mean stability. She is fairly consistent. Her budgets have been helped by an almost total neglect of the German military. I should mention this for all of Europe. Europe frequently chides and mocks the United States for not having free healthcare for all of its citizens, and they brag frequently, whether it's Norway, Sweden, Germany, England, France, all of them, they brag about the superiority of their healthcare systems. I'd point out a few things. Number one is it's not true. The United States healthcare system is much better. There's a reason people come here. Now, certainly, it's cheaper to get basic services in other nations, but for the serious service, the United States is the best. And number two is the only reason Europe can do that is because for the most part, European military expenditures are embarrassing. The German Navy is roughly equivalent to 3 men in a rowboat. Germany recently had to turn down the acceptance of a new ship because it was built with a list. And also, it has very few weapons. Most German submarines are unable to actually set sail. Many German helicopters don't work. The German military is a farce and an embarrassment. And why is that? Because all the money that the United States spends on defending the entire world doesn't get spent on healthcare. If the United States did not subsidize Europe, if Norway, if Sweden were forced to pay for their own protection, well, they wouldn't have what they have. The truth is, the United States forms an umbrella of peace and protection over many much weaker nations who offer little in the way of gratitude or really wisdom. So if the United States were to pull back from Europe, which I'm not saying is a good thing, I think that would be a mistake, many of these nations are utterly helpless. The German military, as I said, is an embarrassment to their own people. Now, there's a reason for that. In times past, when the German military has grown strong, that has led to multiple world wars. So I understand the idea behind it, but it would be wise for many of these nations who enjoy the protection of the United States and the security and the peace if they could show at least the graciousness of keeping their mouth shut on things that they don't understand. So Germany continues. Her recent decrees, as Merkel, concerning immigration created the European migrant crisis, which shows no signs of ending, has been destructive in many ways as migrants have flowed out of Africa and the Middle East into Europe, and throughout that has created a number of problems. It's created there's a difficulty. There was something magical about America in the 1800s and the 1900s as the idea of the great melting pot, but that came with tremendous bloodshed and pain and suffering. So to be an Irishman in America at certain times has been hard. A Jew has been hard. An Italian has been hard. All these people came to America for the hope of new life, but it wasn't as if it was easy. And it's become even harder now in Europe. Her vision for Germany is a unified Europe that stands alone against Russia, China, and the United States. So what we see in many ways is kind of this idea that someday there'll be four major world powers: the United States, China, Russia, and a unified Europe. It's unlikely that any of that will come to fruition. In fact, the European Union seems closer to a breakup than it actually does a full embrace of solidarity. Okay, we'll continue with post-Cold War for the rest of this week. Make sure you get your quiz done. It's due by Wednesday, the 20th, and then starting on Wednesday and Thursday, I'll be announcing what is to come in the days ahead. Thank you.